What's up guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Chris Lado. Today's an exciting video from Ryan Graves. So this will be a reaction video for Ryan Graves' recent presentation from the AiAA 2021 conference. There's a 3-hour presentation. It's amazing. I watched the whole thing yesterday. As soon as it came out, I was basically eating popcorn. I have 8 pages of notes, literally 8 pages of notes. Very exciting. 6 really kind of mind-blowing presentations. I recommend the whole thing if you have time. Pro tip, you can speed it up. So I watched it at 1.75 speed on YouTube. Takes a little less than 2 hours. But today this will be focused just on Ryan Graves' presentation. Ryan Graves, he was the F18 pilot who witnessed all these box orbs, if you will. He explains it in this presentation. But witnessed these things, these UAPs in their airspace daily. So daily while they're training off the East Coast. And he says this stuff is still going on. So it's still going on. They're still seeing it, these UAPs. So he is a multiple witness. He was in the flight with the gimbal, basically when that gimbal object was videoed. So very exciting video. Incidentally, he back in early June, he agreed to be on my show, but then something happened. He was basically brought in for hearings and he couldn't make any more public statements. So this is really the first that I've seen anyway on public statements from Ryan Graves. Very exciting. My hope here is I can translate some of the pilot speak and make it mean more to you. Big shout out, thanks to my Patreons. Again, I couldn't do it without you guys. Great form of support. I think it's transparent. Really love it. If you want to join the team, the link is in the description. Patreon.com/Chris Lado. But really just being here and watching with an open mind, biggest form of support. If you do like the video, please like and subscribe. Sorry I have to say this every time. If I don't say it, you won't do it. So please like and subscribe. Try and share this information out. You'll see from this video that this is a real thing going on. These UAPs are real. They're out there right now. And as Ryan shows in this video there's serious safety issues going on. There's serious safety issues with these things flying around out there. So without further ado, let's get right to the video. Okay, this is the brief. There's Ryan Graves up in the corner. This eyewitness account, persistent detection of non-participating aircraft by U.S. Navy tactical aircraft from 2014 to the present. He's a lieutenant. This was in the conference of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics 2021 conference. There were 6 presentations. The full briefing, it's 3 hours long, but really is amazing. I will probably go through and make a video on almost each one of those 6 videos. But for this, with Ryan Graves in his element, so exciting. Let's see what he has to say.
Technology that we have the privilege to use. So it's an honor for me to speak to you all here. And this is certainly going to be a highlight. So thank you for being here. The title of my talk is Persistent Detection of Non-Participating Aircraft by United States Navy Tactical Aircraft. And you'll notice the date 2014 to the present. Next slide, please. So for those that do not have a background, as stated, I was a F18 Foxtrot pilot attached to VFA 11, the Red Rippers. We were stationed in NAS Oceana. It's the Master East Coast Jet Base located in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Now, as a Navy pilot, we are training when we're in the United States. So we're not in an operational status. We don't necessarily carry weapons. What we are doing is going through our training so that when we deploy, we can act as an expeditionary force. But to prepare for those deployments, we operate in a number of working areas, one of those being off the coast of Virginia Beach, starting about 10 nautical miles off the coast, where it is not a restricted area, but it is an area where we will maintain MARSA, which is when the military assumes responsibility for separation of aircraft. So we typically are in communication with everyone that is out there, and we do have some assistance from controllers to give us a heads up if anyone is out there transiting that shouldn't be.
So Ryan gives us this brief interview. Points I wrote down were from 2014 to the present. So he mentions later in this briefing that these sightings are still going on. You know, it's persistent detection of non-participating aircraft. So pretty interesting. Persistent means over a long period of time. Still going on now, still going on today. And non-participating, meaning they're not letting us intercept them. Okay, so they're basically elusive. The Red Rippers VFA 11, they do a lot of their training out here in Whiskey 72. So if you zoom in right here, you can see it says W72 Alpha. Those are the warning areas. So it is, you can fly through it. Okay, so it's not a restricted airspace per se, but it's a warning area. So if you go in there, it's at your own risk. Okay, so a fighter will just rip through a Cessna. You know, I had a friend who basically just went right through a Cessna he couldn't see. and killed the 2 people in the Cessna. So it will just rip right through. So it's really on the pilots flying through there, the aircraft flying through there to avoid these areas. And we do everything we can. That's why we had the E2 out there. That's why they have the Aegis cruisers, is to practice how they're actually going to fight. And part of that is maintaining the safety awareness of the airspace. So they're making sure there's no other planes out here in this area while they're doing their daily training. So being a combat aviator is very intense. It is full days, 13, 14-hour days, right up to crew rest, working the weekends. I can only imagine while they're out on the ship, it's got to be even more hardcore. So most of the stuff we do on a daily basis is just training. And so that when we get into combat, we can execute in a safe manner. So being safe is very difficult. And you just have to make it a priority.
One very important consideration is during this time period, we were one of the few squadrons that had the aircraft plumbed in order to upgrade our primary sensor, the APG-73. We were upgrading it to the APG-79, which was really a big change for us to go from the mechanically scanned array to the active, to the Aesa radar. So a lot of capability. And for some of us, it wasn't our first time flying this aircraft, utilizing this radar, as we had used it during our training. But when we got to the fleet squadron, we were strictly APG-73 squadron until this point.
So an actively electronically scanned array radar is advanced new technology. So we're not doing this mechanically scanned stuff anymore, where you just have one beam. Now it's a flat plate of little tiny cells, if you will, or I call them pixels, but they're not really pixels. It's actually a little transmitting radar, tiny, very small radar, and this can send out a very small beam, okay? Or you can focus all those now digitally. And now you can aim, you can shape the beam using digital avionics. You're not mechanically scanning back and forth. So since it's digital, it's much faster, much more effective. You can get much more accurate. You can send out just a little tiny bit of information, so you're not giving away your position. You're minimizing the chance that they will know that you're targeting you. It's also very effective against electronic attacks, so jamming. Aces are very jam resistant just by their very nature. Like I mentioned, they're just sending out a little bit of information, all those different beams that they can now shape. So very advanced, and this is really the difference. Okay, so once they got these Aces in there, they started seeing these contacts. He later says in the presentation about 2 to 5 contacts he would see in his area.
Additionally, we would often fly with the AN/ASQ-228 Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, which I will furthermore refer to as the FLIR.
This is the ATFLIR referred to. They call it FLIR in the Navy. It's like Kleenex. Okay, a forward-looking infrared is a system, but it's taken over, so they just call it FLIR. Okay, kind of a misnomer. But this is the ASQ-228. It's Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, so it's an advanced FLIR pod. So the Nimitz with the FLIR-1, I'm sure the internals have been upgraded over that time, but potentially not. But then the Gimbal and the GoFast video are made with this, what he's referring to, a modern ASQ-228 ATFLIR pod.
That is kind of our eyeball, where we can receive the standard camera vision, or IR energy, depending on the mode we're selected in. And really how the story starts is that we start upgrading the radar while we're flying the area, and essentially we start picking up more things than we're used to. Next slide, please. All right, so once we started flying onto the areas, we started noticing some radar contacts that were in the confines of our working areas that did not appear to be respecting any of the area subdivision boundaries or even the primary boundaries outside of the airspace. They didn't seem to be playing by the same rules as us. A lot of them were stationary. Some of them were flying in some patterns that we'll discuss here later. And we were really seeing them wherever we were looking. So really from 35,000 feet down the surface, which is kind of our standard scan where I would typically look. So, this is the airspace that we're typically operating in. And
so very interesting here. I guess I just assumed that it was not daily contact, but he says pretty much everywhere we looked, we saw these things. I mean, that's just mind blowing to me that they're constantly out there. Like, if we want more evidence on UAP, there they are, fly out there and look at them. They're there. So he's saying daily contact. I mean, imagine this, daily contact. It's just crazy. And to have contacts in your airspace that aren't adhering to the rules is just unbelievable to me. Like I just mentioned, or if you just fly through a working area, I've had aircraft fly through working areas where I was fighting in with, sometimes up to 10, 12 aircraft just flying around, and we're not looking necessarily everywhere. There are mid-airs in exercises, planes do crash, fighters especially. So just flying, moseying through this airspace is just very, very strange. That's what I would say. Another point he says here is they have two categories of behavior: is stationary, so a 0 ground speed, and non-stationary, as measured by the APG-79. So the 79 is saying the actual speed, but I believe it's not completely accurate. But stationary, that 0 ground speed. He mentions it in a minute, but it's not moving with the wind. So it's just sitting there in relation to the Earth. That's very weird, very strange. Everything in the air moves together. Okay, it's like you're in the ocean. If you're swimming in a river sideways, you're still gonna move. And if you're fighting in a river, okay, underwater, or if you're fighting underwater, now the whole fight is actually gonna move. So you're relative to each other, you're staying about the same position. But if they have higher winds this way, it will affect their missiles differently. Anyway, so everything moves together is what I'm trying to explain in the air. Everything moves together. It's just like, because you're all in the same medium. If there's wind, everyone's flying through that wind, unless something is not, which is very weird, where it is stable, where it's holding stable in relation to the Earth, and not with the wind. It's just crazy to me.
As I said, there's really two categories. Is how we surmise this. Is that there were two. There's stationary ones, and that was indicated by relative velocity to the surface of the Earth, and then non-station ones that were moving around out there. As we were exclusively operating off of the East Coast and over the water, we did notice them over the water, so a bit of a selection bias. But turning back to the west or when operating over the land, our radar is out in front of us, and we did not see them over land.
So he mentions it here that initially they didn't see him over land, which I assume means that they did see it later once they started looking. Okay, but initially he says they weren't necessarily looking for them, but they didn't really notice them either. So it's much more noticeable, I guess, over the water. This is normal. Okay, so if you're looking down, at least, if you're looking down at something with the radar, if there's background clutter, so from the terrain, from the ground, it's going to bounce all that radar energy back. Makes it difficult to actually pick out targets. So even for any system, it makes it difficult to pick out targets. Where over water, it's like a flat plate normally, unless there's crazy waves or something, that radar energy is basically just going to bounce off, but anything actually out there is going to come back. So it's easier to pick things up with radar, with your eyeballs, etc., when it's, near the surface of the ocean rather than near the surface of the ground would be more difficult. But anyway, velocity makes it easier. The fact you can pick up a completely stationary target, that's amazing. And that's with the APG-79. So a stationary target is very, very difficult for a radar to pick up. At least the radar that I used, APG-68 and the Viper, I think very similar to the 73, APG-73 that they used before. A stationary target, it would not see. It'd be very difficult. So anything moving less than 50 knots is essentially stationary. It has to do with how radar actually works, how it breaks out between the background. So it's really dealing with background clutter. If you're looking up now, there's nothing in the background except for space. Then it's much easier for radars to break this stuff out. They don't have to worry about terrain and terrain clutter, really. And that's why people go low altitude, is to hide behind the trees, but also to hide in the clutter. So you're actually hiding in the background clutter of the radar energy. Okay, so the fact it can pick up stationary shows the APG-79, that's really the breakthrough here. And then he talks about the aspect. It's weird.
At this point. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the stationary objects were a bit peculiar in appearance on our sensors. So always 0.0 Mach, as defined again, stationary over a ground point, regardless of winds. So remaining stationary against the winds in a very stable manner. Target aspect indicative of perhaps the computer didn't know how to read it, or perhaps rotation. So the blue circle with the line coming out of it represents what I would see on my system. And the straight line represents the target aspect of the contact. So where are they going?
Target aspect's critical for planes, really, essentially, for fighting, okay? And what aspect is, okay, is this is the hot aspect, okay, 1/8. This is in the beam, or 3 aspect, right? That's 9. And then this is a tail aspect, 6 o'clock. Okay, so it's on a clock formation. Check your 6. Okay, that's behind. Why? Because all of our missiles, at least recently, all of our weapons up until now were pointed forward in aircraft. Okay, because we're flying through the air, a missile, and it still has to come safely off the aircraft, right? Bombs still have to come safely off the aircraft. That's why they're aerodynamically shaped. bullets, you know, shoot essentially out straight. I think we've tried all the other stuff, right? We've tried shooting the other way back in World War I. Didn't work. This is what we found works the best. Our newest missiles, actually, they come off and they will, you know, pull up to 70 Gs now is what we've gotten to do these crazy turns. So when he talks about aspect, that's what he's talking about. Okay, so what's weird now, first off, is 0.0 Mach. That's just crazy. Like, it's stationary over the ground, which would indicate to me like a system problem, okay, if we didn't see these with our eyes, essentially. But target aspect now, so what you're seeing down there, target aspect is initially, it's like, it shows like this, and then it shows a target aspect like that, and then it shows a target aspect like that. That's what he shows. So it's like 1, 2, 3, essentially. And this is a stern conversion. So he mentions it later in Gimbal, but basically want to float to someone's stern. That's their 6 o'clock. You get behind them, you're in the control zone. There's nothing they can do.
While this particular drawing down here shows a progression through 3 stages, that's what we see. We basically see a stationary object where the target aspect would, in a somewhat consistent manner, kind of rotate around the contact. So it kind of was almost as if it was kind of just banging around up there, or there was some uncertainty with the reading. So in that way, at least I was able to kind of look out and be like, oh, that's one of those particular things out there. And it was a way of identifying them and separating it from potentially other air contacts out there.
He mentions target aspect indicative of uncertainty or perhaps rotation. So that's where that spins around. And then they were seeing them everywhere. So that's a big point, is that they weren't looking for these things. They were just showing up on the radar basically on every mission. So whenever they went out to this airspace, if he's going cold, just go to reset the fight, right? So after we fight, if they're doing intercepts, they'll fly separate away and then point back at each other, set up the fight. So while they're going cold here, you know, you're doing your ops checks, checking your fuel, reviewing what you did for the last engagement, writing down notes, thinking about what you're going to do in the next, setting up, building your formation, everything together. While your radar is out there searching, now this is where they're seeing it, I think, in these downtimes. And thanks to Ryan and really for asking the question, like thinking, hey, what are these things?
Next slide, please. The non-stationary behaviors really are mostly defined by the speed. So I would typically see them somewhere in the vicinity of 0.6 Mach to 0.8 Mach, and they would be proceeding either in a straight line east. I would see them in a racetrack pattern. And occasionally I'd see them just coming down, usually not aggressively fast, just coming down 1,000, 4,000 feet. It is a very rough estimate. It didn't appear to me as if it was drifting down, I would say, but it was moving down with a decent velocity.
So that's interesting as well. So the speeds 0.6 to 0.8 Mach, that's normal fighter speeds. You know, we cruise, at least in the Viper, at 0.8 Mach, close to that. So the gimbal object I had going around the same speed. So fighter speeds, 250 knots, that's even kind of slow. It's closer to 0.6 Mach for the gimbal object. On rare occasions, detected supersonic. So 1.0 Mach is supersonic. So faster than that. Should have had some sort of audible. So there should have been a sonic boom out there, detectable on the ships, is my guess. Or I've actually been able to see, you can see if it's looking up through the sun. I've seen the shockwave of a sonic boom, so you can actually see it. Interesting here, he personally observed. So this is what he said. Witness statement is a racetrack pattern. A racetrack pattern is just in a circle. That's our normal cap. We call it a racetrack pattern. Or flying east towards open waters. This is another weird. So basically from the land direct to the east to the water. Where are they going? And then climbing, descending. This is also interesting. It's just a slow descent. 1,000 feet per minute. That's basically what you're descending. It's a standard instrument descent, essentially. That's what you're doing in an airliner, just a normal descent. 4,000 feet is probably when you feel the descent in an airliner, so it feels steep to you. It's probably that, but still not very fast. You know, fighters, we can climb and descend much faster than that, many thousands of feet, 10 to 20,000 feet per minute.
On the rare occasions, we'd look out, or at least I would look out, and I would see them in the supersonic range, 1.1 to 1.2 Mach. Those were kind of the ones that I would typically see just kind of cruising east. They wouldn't be in a holding pattern at that airspeed when I did observe those. And one thing that's kind of peculiar here is that, I very rarely would see them accelerate. So I would very rarely see a stationary one that would be stationary, and while I watched it, it would just accelerate to 0.6 or whatever airspeed, 1.1. I very rarely see that, right? And it's an important thing to remember here that we're not out there looking for these things in particular, right? So we have very complex training missions and objectives that we're looking to accomplish. And so this is kind of a passing consideration. Of course, we'll talk about here shortly why that was a problem, but initially Initially, we weren't considering them as a physical object. It was the real reason, but we came to respect them shortly afterwards. Next slide, please. All right, so the fact that they appeared stationary for the most part and/or were kind of moving at airspeeds that we weren't expecting, they weren't expected to be there, right? So for one, we weren't expecting a number of these things to be here anytime, right? It's pretty much F-18s only out there. So to have a non-player out there was strange. But with the radar upgrade, our initial assessment initially was that it was some type of false track that was being provided by the radar. We were not seeing these on the APG-73. We just simply weren't picking them up. However, on the APG-73, you did sometimes get anomalous readings that could represent perhaps some atmospheric conditions that we were familiar with, and we would expect to see a false track or some reflections or some ground clutter or something to that effect. So we were familiar seeing stuff like this, and that was kind of our initial assessment. Was that the APG-79? Oh, it must have some of those same issues that the 73 had, and perhaps it'll get worked out because we'll get some software upgrades. So at this point, again, it wasn't really a safety concern for us. It was a point of interest about our radar. Next slide, please. Eventually, by chance, aircraft did get within vicinity of the radar contact for the FLIR to be positioned onto that piece of the sky, and they did pick up energy coming from that point. So the FLIR is slave to look at the radar's designation. So at one point they're flying toward one of these objects. They had it on their radar, and as they traversed in the vicinity of it, the FLIR looked at it, stared at it, and they noticed IR energy coming from it. I would notice that. So for what it looked like for me is if there was just energy kind of coming out of that point of the sky, and almost as if someone was shining a flashlight down my sensor. I wasn't seeing, as you see in the image here, the skin of an aircraft. I wasn't seeing exhaust. Even when they're moving, no exhaust. I'm just kind of seeing the fact that it was almost like something was shining at me. IR energy was being reflected at me. So yeah, and they would typically be cold as well on the IR. So I can select white hot, cold hot, white hot or cold hot.
So the ATFLIR, basically it's slaved to look at the radar's designation. So all the systems are normally slaved. So wherever you put the radar, your ATFLIR will look through that piece of sky. So now you can count noses, etc., and identify targets out at range. So the ATFLIR would see it. They're receiving observable IR energy from the contacts. But what's so interesting is that it's typically cold, as we've seen in many of the videos, or at least it's typically cold as we've seen in the videos, but can't discern structure. And very interesting, he brings up the flashlight point. Yeah, that's Mick West's argument, essentially, is that there's some bright light shining and that the lens or flare, however you want to define that, there's a smudge or some sort of glare on the lens, is spinning with when the gimbal actually rotates. So in that case, it would tend to back up this idea that it is kind of just a bright point light of energy. Can't discern structure, can't see any skin around it. Basically what we're seeing in the video, so the gimbal video, the Go Fast video, and the FLIR 1 video is what they saw on a daily basis, probably seeing today as far as we know.
We'd be able to see that the temperature was relatively colder than the surrounding, which was surprising towards us. So at this point, this really kind of amped it up for us, and we kind of took like a pause for a second and say, hey, there's very likely something physical at these points in the sky here. This is now a big problem because these things were out in our area. People were flying by them and not giving them a second thought. And it's probably more a matter of luck than anything else that we didn't have a midair before we were aware of this. So yeah,
I can only imagine the conversation. I wish I was in the room for the conversation that happened, because at some point, yeah, you can say, yeah, these are just radar contacts. But then when you look with another sensor and you see something there and it's recorded, you can't just disregard that anymore. Now it becomes a safety. You have to elevate that to the leadership. So I'm just curious how that conversation that went on the ship, I'm sure it went on because it's safety related. Just funny. I wonder how that went.
Better lucky than good, we always say. Next slide, please. Of course, once the word was out that something was there, of course, some people wanted to take a look. And shortly thereafter, we did end up getting our eyeballs on. But this particular story was purely by chance. There was a flight of 2 F-18 Foxtrots in my squadron with 2 aircrew in each aircraft for a total of 4 aircrew. As they're flying out to the entry point in that area, which is a standard location at standard altitudes that all aircraft go in or out of the area. One of the objects, it appears, was basically at that entrance point. So as the 2 aircraft were checking into the area, one of these objects basically flew right between the section. The aircraft were probably in the vicinity of about 100 feet apart from each other. So the object was very likely somewhere in the vicinity of 50 feet-ish if it did go directly between them. But it's very difficult to just eyeball gauge size and distances in an aircraft. But when they came back to the ready room, the people that saw it, they were in the ready room with their gear on, which is atypical. Typically, we want to get the sweaty hot stuff off as soon as possible. was, hey, what's up? And he just had a very surprised look on his face. And he says, hey, you know those things that we see? Well, I almost hit one of those things. And then he described it as a darker gray cube inside a clear sphere, where the kind of the corners of the cube were touching kind of the surface of that clear sphere. I don't know contextually how you see a clear sphere, so I don't know what that necessarily translates to in reality, right? So there must have been some type of way he visually could make out that sphere. What that means, I don't know. He estimated 15 to 30 feet. Again, very difficult to make estimates, especially when it's a split second near miss like that.
So very interesting. This is basically the first observed witness account, at least that I know of this box orb thing, or whatever it is. So a flight of 2 F-18s, so there's 4 people in there. And what he's talking about, split the section. So basically, we just have 2 planes. There's always a flight leader and there's always a wingman. Okay, the wingman flies off of the flight leader. So the flight lead will get us out to, they lead out to the airspace. It's like you're carrying around your little buddy, okay? But it's a system designed, as the fighting system, okay? The wingman, he maintained deconfliction. So he's always looking at the flight lead. He's flying off the flight lead, okay? The flight lead, he's flying off his instruments, okay? So the flight lead needs to fly safely through the clouds with their instruments. In this case, it's clear outside, okay? But the wingman's gonna be only 100 feet. 100 feet is very, very close, okay? If you think about, the Super Hornet's 60 feet long. You can't even fit a Super Hornet between you, or you can barely fit 1.5 Super Hornets in between this section here. So they're very close. We call it roof formation, or they could have actually even been rejoining or something. And something 30 feet across goes in between them. It's basically literally splitting the formation, and initially I thought these things were kind of small, like 6 feet across or 7 feet based off of the Omaha deep dive I did and some other estimates. But here he says clearly 15 to 30 feet, okay? But it's just a split second going by there, but they had a good eyeball reference, okay? Because now they know how far the F-18 is, and they know that this thing is right in between them. So I think their brain, everything had a good idea of what the size of this thing was. So 15 to 30 feet is quite a bit bigger than I was thinking. And here's even crazier, right? It's a black or dark gray cube inside of a clear yet visible sphere. The corners of the cube appeared to touch the inner surface of the sphere. I mean, how do you guys explain that? Mick West, how do you explain that?
We did, of course, have continued visual encounters after that, people going out, taking a look. But it's very difficult to see them. We would have them on the radar, we'd have them on the FLIR, our joint helmet mount cueing system, which is pumping all this information onto our visor and also tracking our head movements, is showing us exactly where to look for the object as we're coming to emerge with them. And we do this all the time. We train to this. This is not an abnormal thing to come to emerge with an aircraft for us. So as we come to these merges, this thing that we do all the time, we're highly trained at for dogfighting, it was a hard time seeing them. We couldn't see them. So
this is mind-blowing as well. Okay, so I only got to use a helmet for, I don't know, a few years while in Turkey, actually, because I did most training. So getting to emerge, really lose sight, lose the fight. That's it for dogfighting. Okay, so you can tell immediately. I can tell immediately if someone can't see me anymore, if I'm in a fighter, because I'm gonna win in about 15, 20 seconds. Okay, because if they don't know where you are, you just fly to that 6 o'clock position. Okay, if they don't know where you are, I'm gonna fly underneath them so you can't see me. And then I'm just gonna come back to the 6 o'clock position, okay? And then you're in trouble. In that case, he's talking about this JHEMIX, okay? This is the helmet-mounted cueing system. So all of our sensors, okay, again, they're gonna focus it down. But the whole point, when you get to a dogfight engagement, survive to get to the engagement, okay? And then from there, it's gonna be maintain sight and get to that 6 o'clock position into that control zone. And Ryan says it here, they practice it all the time. Every day, if you're doing any air-to-air fighting, you're going to practice that, getting the tally, getting to the engagement, getting inside their control zone, minimizing their weapon engagement zones. This is all standard stuff. So that HEMIX, helmet mounted cueing system, it will show a little square box, just like in video games, right? When you look out in video games, you're playing some video game, there's a little square over the bad guy, and then you look inside the square and you see a little tiny dot. That's basically what it looks like, except now he can see it. So all their systems, this ABG-79 system, very accurate, or the ATFLIR pod, again, very, very accurate, is going to tell basically a little square around this thing. So when they get to the merge, you just look inside the square and you can see the dot, and you call tally, and now you can set up for your engagement. That didn't happen. So basically they go to this engagement, everything's there, they have a solid track, as solid as they can tell. They look inside the square and there's nothing there. So again, kind of mind-blowing.
Many of us will go out, we zip by, try to slow down. We couldn't see them. Sometimes maybe it would appear like they would descend a little bit, which unfortunately kind of indicates our ability to see them if they just kind of drop below the belly of our aircraft that was flipping over inverted, which I'm sure some did, but we are also making sure we don't hit these things out there. So we are giving them a pretty healthy buffer.
Okay, so if you're fighting with someone in a dogfight, if you're in like a stack, the best place to be is right below them. Okay, they can't see you as you go back to their six. Or if you're going to attack someone from below and you have to merge, if you're merging high to low, okay, I will actually merge from below them. They have to push over, and now it's going to be very difficult for them to see. Okay, so what he's talking about is below the nose. You're trying to look over the nose, so what you can do is you can just roll inverted, like he said. So roll inverted, and now I can try and pick them up. But this is not very comfortable, okay? And if, like I said, if you have another plane right next to you, you know, you don't want to be doing that. It's unsafe. So this is what he's talking about: roll inverted, try and pick up the tally, and then now I'll try and make the engagement happen while I can still see them.
So take that for what you will as far as the visual acuity thing. But you know, our box and our sensors are showing us one piece of the sky. So what's the difference between this first near miss and the second one where it's hard to see them? I don't know, but we can talk about that later. Right now we're kind of getting a little ticked off in the squadron, because for us, our first inclination that this is some type of classified drone program that we're not aware of, and someone is testing it where they should not be, and something needs to be done because we're going to take out an aircraft with possibly 2 souls on it. So,
you know, which makes sense. I mean, what else could it be, honestly? You know, because it's not any airplanes. All your commercial traffic they know about these risky areas. Okay, obviously for safety reasons, so they're flying around it. When you actually go there, you can't. When you intercept these things, you can't even see what they are. If it is some sort of like foreign adversary system, it's well advanced of our technology. So I mean, I'm curious what they're talking about in those meetings. You know, what are these things? Is it a U.S. program? But again, why would a U.S. program be in these whiskey training areas? You know, over the ocean. He'll mention later in this briefing that they know that they are being collected on. Okay, because you're in international waters. International waters is totally legit. You can have whatever listening boat you want out there. You paint it like a fishing boat. All of a sudden, boom, I can sit right below your airspace legally, listen to all your comm, maybe send out some radar energy, and try and get your tactics. I'm sure this is done by all countries around the world. I'm sure they're right now under those airplanes, those F-18s that are flying, seeing these contacts, is probably the Chinese, the Russians, everybody. They're probably out there in fishing boats right now, or however they keep it relatively secret. But at the end of the day, it's illegal outside of outside of 12 nautical miles, outside of the ADIS. It's free waters. They can be there. So why would a U.S. secret system that we're testing be over international waters? You know, that is the whole point of Area 51 in those areas. That's the whole point of the containers. You know, if you look where they are, they're in the middle of America. They're in the center over land. It's very difficult to get there. Yeah, you could drive a car up there and maybe try listening, but guess what? Now we're there. You're in America. Now we can say, hey, what are you doing here? But in the ocean, you can't. So the fact, or the argument that it would be a U.S. secret system operating in a training area is just doesn't make any sense to me. You know, if this was a real U.S. secret system, it would be, you know, in our ranges, in our national ranges where we did all the nuke tests. You know, it's going to be in New Mexico. It's going to be out there in Arizona, Nevada. That's where our secret areas are. I mean, I think this is not, pretty well known to the rest of the world. Same as Russia. They're going to put all their, secret stuff, their big, tests, they're going to be hidden in the center of the country, not out on the coast where everybody can see them. Okay, so it doesn't, there's no, people are like, why do you always say it's aliens? Why do you say it's aliens? It's because, honestly, what else could it be? I honestly don't know. And you're going to see here, they're not going to know either. They're going to be hit against the block.
That was our primary concern at this point. Next slide, please. Responses midair, we did submit a safety report and then a number of subsequent safety reports, which are now in the public sphere. And I'll let you read this quote from my commanding officer at the time, who's basically acknowledging the fact that no one is probably looking at this information, but this is the only avenue with which we have to report these safety issues. Okay,
so this is what happens when in the military we don't have any other way to explain it. So basically you try and up channel things, this will be a problem, this will be an issue, it's gonna bite us in the ass sooner or later. But at some point it will, and they don't listen. This happens a lot in the safety world. I was a safety officer, and so I spent a lot of time in this, fighting through this. So he says it, commanding officer, although this report is primarily submitted for tracking purposes, it is only a matter of time before this results in a mid-air collision in Whiskey 72. So basically he's just saying, look, I'm doing this just to track it, but all of our other things have been exhausted, and it's just a matter of time before we have a crash out in Whiskey 72. So maybe watch the news if you see any Whiskey 72 crashes or crashes that happen in Whiskey 72. So that's a HAZ rep. I've mentioned this in a few other ones. We call it Hazardous Incident Report, or a HATR, High Accident Something Report. So we call them HATRs. We call them something different. This is a HAZ rep with the Navy Safety Center now. So,
all right. So fast forward a couple months here, and we are going out to do our workup cycle for our upcoming deployment aboard the USS Roosevelt. And during that workup cycle, we head down to the Jacksonville coast where we do training for a number of months. Some highlights here: we were aware that there was foreign intelligence gathering operations in our vicinity, which are relatively routine. You know, when we arrived out into the area, the objects were there. So they were either already there when we arrived, or they followed us there, and I don't have any data to support either one of those conclusions. While returning from one of our flights, an air-to-air flight, relatively large, maybe 8 aircraft, I was in a flight with, I believe it was 3 other aircraft. We went out to conduct our mission. As the missions are ending and people start coming home due to being low on gas, it's typically 1 aircraft at a time. We don't just all come back at the same time. One of the aircraft I was flying with picked up a radar contact and flew over a bit on their way home to investigate. While they once they landed, they debriefed, showed the tape I'll talk about here in a second, but the image I captured is what you see on the screen here. I'll let you look at that for a quick moment. Of note, this is the FLIR, and this is in an IR mode. Not
yeah, if you recognize that. So the gimbal video he's talking about here, it's already mentioned they're aware of foreign intelligence gathering operation. I'm sure that's just standard. The objects showed themselves to be in Jacksonville working areas upon our arrival. So they were already there. While returning from an air-to-air training mission, another aircraft in my flight observed a number of interesting radar contacts. While stern converting the object, and with 10 nautical miles, we see the following, which is the gimbal video. So I was very happy to see this actually, because it's less than 10 nautical miles and they are converting to the stern. So what that is basically they're just trying to fly to that 6 o'clock position. This is what an intercept is. You're trying to go from a hot aspect to a cold aspect. That is a stern conversion. I'm converting to his stern position to get to that control zone, so he has no options after that. So within 10 nautical miles and what I thought was a cold stern conversion, is it 7.4 plus or minus 5 nautical miles? Ryan, I'd like to ask that question, but probably can't get that information. But inside of 10 nautical miles in a stern conversion, that's exactly what I constructed for the DDDD debunk videos.
Of note, this is the FLIR, and this is in an IR mode, not camera. Next slide, please. All right, so what was happening outside of the small clip that folks may have seen already? So on the situational awareness page is kind of where all our data is getting pumped into, and we typically look at that to receive offboard information or even our own onboard information in order to identify targets or all the stuff that we do up there. So what was interesting was that on our situational awareness page, what we noticed was that there was and I use the word formation here, there's a formation of about 4 to 5 aircraft flying in what resembled a wedge formation. And as they were flying along, they began a turn that had some type of radius of turn, right? So it wasn't an instantaneous direction change. It turned as if it was cutting through the air. And they were a bit jumbled, right? So they didn't maintain perfect formation. They kind of scattered out, almost looked semi-random. And they were at separate altitudes as well, but not, so they weren't at the exact same altitude. And as they rolled back out, they basically did a 180 and started flowing in the other direction. The object, the gimbal object from the image before, is represented in this slide by the circle with the line going through it. And this object was proceeding behind the larger group. And essentially, it approached and then it stopped for a bit. And then as the formation turned back 180 degrees, it basically just it just stopped from that position and then immediately went in the opposite direction, more or less, so that there was really no radius of turn, as I was highlighting on the formation.
This is very interesting to me. This is the first time I've heard about actual flying tactics. So, you know, normally he's talking about these 5 front contacts. They're turning like this. Okay, there's basically a radius of curvature he talks about. But the gimbal just basically goes with them, stops, waits for them to come back, and then just starts flying with them again.
what was very interesting here was that the formation, they appeared on the radar similar to the objects we would normally see in Virginia Beach, but the large gimbal object was something we had not seen before.
So the gimbal object, it looks different on radar. Sounds like it looks different in person with your eyes and with the ATFLIR, and it moves differently. Okay, so that thing just stops and then goes in opposite directions, whereas the other ones were kind of flying around. So again, all crazy information.
All right, so this was intended to just be a quick talk about this. I would like to get more into the safety conversation here as we continue forward, but I think it's very important that people understand that this is a very pragmatic thing for me. This is not, I'm not a UFO guy. This is all very new for me. My concern is the fact that we are almost hitting something that's out in our working areas with very expensive aircraft and with people at risk here. The UAP task force report that came out said that in the past 2 years, there were 11 near misses within the data set that they studied. Those are the ones that A, haven't studied, B, that were reported in the past 2 years. So thank you for coming and listening to this. And I appreciate any help that can be had with the safety issue that we were experiencing.
You're in luck, Ryan. I love safety. I love safety. And this is a safety issue that I mean, without a doubt. UAP task force stated 11 aircraft near misses. There's another very interesting presentation here made by Ted Rowe. He was actually helped found NARCAP. They do civilian reporting. There's tons of data. I'll make a video about his briefing as well. It's also mind-blowing. But there's basically tons of information from civilian pilots over the years. So 1 in 6 career pilots has seen a UAP. I mean, that's unbelievable, right? And that's considered in today's UFO stigmatization world, 1 in 6. So, and you know, the airline pilots I know basically rarely look out the window. Okay, so if you're wondering what they're doing up there, they're probably watching movies. They're probably watching movies or reading or something. They're probably not just looking outside at the slowly passing by air, just like you don't in the back of an airliner. Okay, but maybe they will now, or maybe we can have other systems, because it really is safety related. In that report with the NARCAP, Dick Haynes, he did a research. They had 57 events with these balls of energy affecting the aircraft electronics. 57 affecting the aircraft electronics. So I don't know, you have the Bermuda Triangle out there on the East Coast. Maybe there is something related to this. Okay, maybe you have some sort of, we have UAP activity out there, which is messing up systems, could be messing up navigation equipment, etc. So who knows?
Ryan, thank you so much. I appreciate all your points. So now we go to a question and answer for Ryan. Please, people, go ahead.
Hi, Ryan. This is Chris Plain from the Debrief Head Science Writer. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, Chris.
Hi. All right. First of all, thank you for your service. Could you give me a general ratio here? You mentioned a number of radar contacts without visual, and then you mentioned a handful of visual contacts. Would you say we're seeing hundreds or even thousands of radar tracks and we only have a couple of visuals? What sort of ratio in your experience?
Yeah, it's tough, right? So a typical day in the areas, I would typically see, and again, I don't necessarily represent every single person here. So everything I say is my data set or data set I've talked to people about, and there's a lot of other people there. So I would typically see somewhere between like 2 and 5 objects in the working areas, when I was up there. So
this is crazy to me alone. So 2 and 5, you're seeing it literally every mission.
Times that by however many years that's been going on. I have heard maybe people have visually seen it, maybe somewhere in the vicinity of 8 to 10 times, and that is me not asking people and people just telling me, so I have no idea what the ratio is, but, obviously we're seeing a lot of them, but that data set is only about 10 visuals. What was very interesting though, when I was deciding to even do any of this and talk to anyone, I was sitting in the ready room with about 10 people and I asked everyone in the room if they remembered those things that were flying around there. And basically everyone that was on the East Coast, there was people on the West Coast too, but the East Coast guys immediately all knew what I was talking about. One even said, hey, oh yeah, the cube things in the sphere, so I said, okay, we're not crazy here.
So would you say that description of the visual, the cube with the sphere inside, is consistent across the cases where people are reporting physically seeing it?
So far as I've heard, and again, as people have talked about the issue that we've been having on the East Coast, which is, been reported to me happening on the West Coast and possibly further inland as well. But yes, as far as I am.
So the question is, when are we going to take it seriously? It looks like they finally are. And it's really just to guys like Ryan Graves, Alex Dietrich. Ryan Graves, really one of the few that's come out recently. I think the only combat aviator that's come out, at least from the 2014, from the East Coast stuff. So, and it's frustrating. I've seen the government. I know there's limited, incentive for them to release this information. You know, they're just going to cover it up, right? Just not set it around. We're investigating it. We're studying it. By the way, we've seen this since 1954. Okay, since 1952, when the USAF Major General said, we are studying this phenomena. And by the way, they had basically the same amount of evidence, really. They had radar information, they had videos, they had witness accounts from military aviators, civilians, everything. So the evidence exists, everybody. Just pretending that it doesn't exist is exactly what it is. You're just literally just pretending that it doesn't exist.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Ryan. This is Peter. I have a question. What you described there as that kind of that gimbal object, and then in front of it was those things in front were the spheres with the cube inside. And is that right? And then when this gimbal object stopped, and did it instantaneously change direction? I mean, did it stop and then just move? Because that would be a huge acceleration if it was moving and it just stopped and then went in another direction.
Yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, yes, to my best assessment, the objects that were in the formation on the radar resembled, the radar contacts I was seeing in Virginia Beach, the Cuban sphere.
So it's like this thing is shepherding these things somehow. These are the parents of it.
I don't have enough information to make that assessment, right? There could be a lot of architectures at play if we're looking at any type of swarm mechanics here. Yeah, and the answer to the second part of the question, which was?
Well, you said it came to a stop.
Oh, yes.
Changed direction.
Yeah, so I don't know, right? If the line between probably an infinite acceleration, if there's a zero time component at that change in direction, and a very small one, is not something I can assess from what I saw.
Well, I mean, not instantaneous, but I mean, very quick. I mean,
the best I can recollect, there was a pause in between the direction change.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
I wish I could be more specific, but I don't. My goal is, unless I'm like 100% sure, I'm very timid about
absolutely
making that last 1% connection saying it happen.
Yeah.
Ryan, it's Philip speaking. I have a question. Thanks for the presentation. During the first presentation of Ravi, and it's a similar question I had, he reported that there's a term in the report called signature management. Does it have a special meaning in terms for the military pilots, and did it apply to the sightings that you just described? What does it mean, signature management? Thank you.
Yeah, that can mean a lot of things. And yes, it is a term that I am very familiar with, and the tactical aviation community is very familiar with. Not to say that the way we use that term is the exact same way that UAP Task Force uses that term. But, I think everyone immediately goes to, the visual signatures, right? So, can you see it? Can you not see it? Some kind of cloaking thing? Is it an RF blocker, right? So can you not see it with a radar at all? Or, can you see it? Is it a something that can detect you're there, but perhaps it's passively detecting you instead of actively detecting you with a radar? That would be some sensor management thing. So it's a big conversation, and unfortunately a lot of it probably goes classified, but I don't know whether my understanding of that term is the same as UAP Task Force.
I've heard this a couple times about signature management. Signature is, it's a combat environment. Okay. So we detect using different systems. Okay. So this is what we're talking about. Signature is you're limiting your detection. Basically, same thing with camouflage. So why do our soldiers wear camouflage uniforms? It's to limit their visible signature. But there's other ways to limit. Okay, you have night vision goggles. Okay, so when I was in training, essentially, it was basically a setup for training. Okay, they stuck a little IR strobe light on us that we couldn't see. Okay, but in IR, it's just like flashing through the forest. Okay, so the bad guys, the trainers, just had to put on NVGs, and there's this giant flashing strobe light, and they could go right to us. Okay, but we had no idea that we were sending out this information. Okay, it was obviously a setup, but that's signature management is how they detect us and how they track, identify. So in this case, signature management is cloaking, is what I'm assuming. They're actually they have ability, or they're saying they have ability to signature manage, meaning they can change their visible signature or their heat signature, your IR, all of these things. If you look at our technologies, stealth technology, you're trying to minimize your radar signature. IR technology, you're trying to minimize your heat signature. Audio technology, you're trying to limit your sound signature. So these things are all your signatures. So I get asked that a lot, so I went a little bit more in depth on that. I also get asked about RF energy. So what is about these RF energy that you've seen maybe in the report? Are they putting out radio frequency energy? And it looks like that they are from the report. I've seen before I argue that it's actually changing the energy that we're sending out. So I'm curious, are they sending out their own internally created energy? And this would also be crazy for me. So mind-blowing information there from Ryan Graves, the target aspect stuff. is so interesting to me. The stationary versus the non-stationary targets, that 15 to 30 feet in diameter. That's a new number for me. I thought these things were smaller. So it was interesting to hear that as well. The description, like the black or gray box inside of a sphere, is just mind-blowing to me. And the statement by the Navy commander basically saying it's only a matter of time before a midair is in Whiskey 72. That's the airspace. Only a matter of time before we have a midair. That's crazy. He confirmed the range for gimbal, so less than 10 nautical miles, and it's in a stern conversion. So basically exactly what I said, or how it reconstructed in my previous DDDDD bunk videos. So I said it was 7.4 nautical miles, plus or minus half a mile, less than 10 nautical miles. They're definitely going to be able to see these things. Very interesting, as well as the flashlight. Remember, he said a lot of times it just looked like they're shining a bright flashlight at us, which is honestly Mick West's argument, is that they're is that what we're really seeing is like a flashlight that is rotating, and that's you know, the glare or lens flare, however you want to define it, is spinning on the screen. So that flashlight example is very interesting to me. And also, again, who knows? I mean, we're still trying to figure out what these things actually are. That formation is very interesting. I would love to talk to Ryan. Hopefully he does come on my show. I'll invite him again after this. I'd love to just ask a few more questions, little minute details. And really at the end is, he's going to continue working on this because it is a safety of flight issue. I know everyone does mock safety, but it is a preservation of assets. It's about saving people's lives and preserving our own assets, you know, and I think that's a very noble and worthwhile cause, to be more efficient with our military, be more efficient, not lose aircraft, okay, not lose maybe civilian aircraft out there. We don't know if that has caused some of these things. I mean, the Bermuda Triangle's out there for a reason. I don't know, maybe that's some hotspot for UAP activity and these things just happen to go through stuff. Anyway, crazy stuff, crazy video. Thank you to Ryan Graves. Thank you, man, for speaking on this important subject. You're one of the few people, one of the few combat aviators out there that's talking about this. So thank you, man. I think really Veterans Day coming up. You know, I haven't done anything in my military career to sacrifice, and people like, you know, Ryan Graves, who are out there speaking. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for your service. All right. Please like and subscribe. Have a great week. Peace.